Okay, so yeah, extreme on interval. So this won't be too bad. My guess is you kind of already have an idea of what they are. Plus, we've already talked about them this year, so it should go pretty straightforward. Having said that, it's a lot of information, and so I'm not necessarily going to try to cram it all in today. I'm going to break the section up into two parts. So today we're going to talk about relative extrema, and then, no. Today I'll talk about extrema on an open interval. Tomorrow I'll talk about extrema on a closed interval. They're kind of connected anyway, but the types of problems are separated. So that's why I figure I'll just, rather than trying to just shove everything in today, it doesn't usually, to me, it doesn't usually work as well to just try to shove all the information into your brain and then give you a work day. Like, I mean, it sounds good in theory, but it just doesn't really work because you try to like process it all. Have I used the word extrema this year? Okay, good. That's a good question to start with then. So extrema is a single word that represents maximum or minimum or both. It's just, extrema is just a single word representing the top and bottom. So rather than saying maximum or minimum, I don't know, they just shorten it. Extrema is actually a plural word that represents kind of all of it. Extremum would mean that that would be a single thing they're talking about. Here we go. Now there's going to be two different types. There's going to be an absolute or global max and min. And I believe you guys kind of talked about absolutes and relatives in pre-calc. An absolute max would mean like the very top of the graph. Absolute min, the very bottom. Some textbooks refer to it as a global instead of an absolute. I'm pretty sure your textbook in pre-calc used absolute. Okay. You might see it referred to either way though. So, and then the second type is called a relative max and relative min. I feel like I've said that this year, but maybe you didn't even know what I was talking about when I mentioned it. So a relative max and min is just like the top within a local area. So if you've got a graph with a whole bunch of hills and valleys, the tops of all the hills are maximums, relative maximums. The bottoms of all the valleys are relative minimums. It doesn't matter if one is higher or lower than the other. So a relative just means you're looking in a small little area. A global or absolute means the absolute top of the whole thing. So here, we'll have a little picture, and I think it might help possibly to just like write directly on this picture what things are. So there is an actual definition of a relative minimum. A relative minimum, which would be this spot right here, we're going to call that a relative min. A relative min means your function changes from decreasing to increasing. So it's usually really easy for you to spot when you're looking at a picture. But if your function changes from decreasing to increasing, that's a relative min. If your function changes from increasing to decreasing, that's a relative max. Now, I don't know if you guys have caught on why I'm referring to it as changing between increasing and decreasing. If you're not looking at a picture and you only have equations to go by, you're going to have to be able to identify if something is a relative max or a relative min by looking at information rather than the picture. And so that's why you'll hear it just be referred to as this put out. This spot is a relative min. And that is because it changes from decreasing to increasing. This spot can also be referred to as an absolute min because it's the very bottom of the graph. It can be both. So it depends on what's being asked or what you're trying to find. Sometimes you're not looking for the absolute bottom. Sometimes you just want to find the bottom of that little spot. So you don't care if it's the absolute lowest. And then same with this one up here. This is a relative max. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Relative max and an absolute max. Now these endpoints, they can't be defined as a relative anything. And that's because they wouldn't change from increasing to decreasing. It's just one or the other. Endpoints can be absolute maxes or absolute mins. These two aren't, but these are possible absolutes. What you're going to find is kind of like I said a minute ago here. You're generally never going to be asked to find both things. The question is usually going to ask you for relative extrema, and relative extrema questions are traditionally on an open interval. Do you guys remember the difference between open and closed intervals? So a closed interval is probably what's more familiar. A closed interval is when you have actual endpoints. So an open interval with parentheses is traditionally where they're going to ask relative. A closed interval is where they're traditionally going to ask for absolute. I say traditionally because I most definitely have seen questions where they do the opposite, and then you have to try to figure out in that situation what's what. I don't know. From a picture, is this pretty straightforward? Like, did you kind of halfway know a lot of this already? Okay. How do we tell if a function is increasing or decreasing? Non-picture. Like if you're just looking at an equation, how do you figure out if it's increasing or decreasing?
Is it if the slope is 0 at that point?
Close. You have the right idea. So a slope of 0 technically is not increasing and not decreasing. It's neither. What you're getting at is what we'll get to in a bit here. A slope of 0 is generally the spot where it's absolute relative max, relative min.
If it switches from a positive slope to a negative slope, like a negative slope.
Okay, so you said the word, what you said was correct. You said the word slope. So if we're looking at an equation, how do we figure out if it's increasing or decreasing? So when you mention the word slope, I'm assuming you're kind of referencing in your mind a picture. But we won't have pictures. If we're just looking at an equation, how do we tell if it's going up? How do we tell what the slope is? The derivative? The derivative is where we're going to try to figure out where all of this information is. So we're not there yet, and I'm kind of leading you forward here. The third section in this unit is going to be called the first derivative test. And that's where you're going to try to figure out everything about the slopes. And the first derivative test is what's going to tell us when something is a relative max, relative min, et cetera, et cetera. It's not this section. I'm just kind of leading us big picture here. I think I already defined this for you. Yes. Look at that. I've already told you all this stuff. Sure, let's just do a couple of these. For looking at that picture, for one, is that an open interval or a closed interval? Open. It doesn't give us any numbers though, so how do we know it's open? Okay, that works. I can live with that. So this one is going to be negative infinity to infinity. And it's kind of weird to think about like the infinity one being an open interval, but it kind of automatically has to be if it has the arrowheads because it's not a set number. So a closed interval is a set number, and so if it goes forever, it's technically open. And so normally you're going to be asked for relative on open intervals, but then sometimes they ask you for absolute if you're looking at a whole function. And then in that case, you usually have to try to figure out somewhat what the function looks like to figure out if it's whatever it is. So these questions are just going from this picture, though. So does this have any relative extrema? That's what it would say. How would you answer it? You can't just say, like, there, right? I mean, sometimes it might have a label, like a letter. Like it might say, this is A. And then you could say A is a whatever. You guys are very quiet this morning. What happened? It's a Wednesday. You have a short week. This is supposed to be exciting. Guess not. Anticlimactic. All right, whatever. We do have I actually already, good thing you just mentioned that. I know it's raptor time today, but it doesn't, my brain doesn't click in that we'll be ending sooner.
Did they approve the Pet Fest?
No, the Pet Fest is gonna be tomorrow.
Yes.
So if the mask mandate would have stayed, they probably wouldn't have had the Pet Fest. I don't know if they're doing something with the Pet Fest, like making it semi-optional if people are uncomfortable with it or something. I'm sure that's somehow in place, but they're still planning on putting it on. So today's a regular Raptor Time day. Tomorrow we have a Pep Fest schedule. So if you guys need that schedule, that's going to be it. I mean, you can take a picture of it tomorrow, whatever if you want. But yeah, so that today and tomorrow are altered schedules. Emma, how do I answer one of those? Can you tell me a relative extrema and how would you actually write down the answer?
Is it like the relative min and max that we were just doing? Is that what that?
I think so. I don't know. I haven't said any other kind.
So,
Is that what you mean by the ones we were just doing?
like, is that what the question was asking?
Oh, are you asking about the word extrema?
Yeah.
Okay. Extrema is a single word that refers to max and min.
Oh,
Gotcha.
okay.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I'm just really familiar with it, so I didn't even think about it. But correct. So if you see the word extrema, and this is often how it'll be written, it'll say relative extrema, and that's directly telling you to find relative maxes or mins, whatever's there.
Okay. So the relative min or absolute min would be -3, -8?
Don't need to do absolute because it only says relative.
Oh, okay.
Okay, wait, though, you went too fast for me. I always forget how to spell relative. I always want to put an E, and I know that's not right. Relative min is what I think you said?
Yeah,
And then what did you say after that?
-3, -8.
Okay, perfect. You can just list the point. That absolutely works. So, that's a perfect answer. One thing that's kind of weird to me is you are going to see the answer written differently a bunch of times, and it just bothers me. There's no standard way to write it. So if you list the point, that's like as specific as you can give, and there's no question you understand what you're talking about. Sometimes you're going to see the answer written as a relative min at x equals -3, and it won't say the height. Sometimes you're going to see the answer written as a relative min of -8. So the specific words they use kind of describe what they're answering, right? I dislike that a lot because it feels semi-confusing because Calc already has enough details. To me, I don't feel like it needs to add that many details on top of it. But it does. So if you just say a point, to me that's going to be the best way to answer it because then there's going to be no confusion over what you're trying to say. I feel like if you give more information than is needed, that's usually pretty safe. Okay, but that was only one answer. So you said this was min. Good. Emma, who's the next person?
MD. Or sorry, Magdalene.
Is MD like not right to say or what?
That's how I said it, you called me out for it.
I did? Is that just because I didn't know who MD was?
Yeah.
Oh. What do you want to go by?
Magdalene.
Oh, you dislike MD.
No, it's fine. It's just a very softball thing. It's only for softball.
Okay. All right, Magdalene.
Okay. Isn't there also a relative min at 4-0?
Sure. Basically the bottom of a hill. If you're looking at a picture, it's usually far easier just to look and immediately know what the answer is. So do you have like a nickname for every sport?
Kinda, sort of.
That's got to get, like, that's confusing. You got to remember so many names. Okay, who's going to help us next?
Grace.
Cripe, you guys are just... All right.
Not Grace, it's her birthday. Maddie.
Oh, that was, no kidding. That would have been mean.
There's a relative max at 2-2.
Relative max at 2-2. And I'm making you do calc on your birthday. That's cruel. I'm sorry.
I had a test on mine.
That is true. If it makes you feel better, I usually have to teach on my birthday. But not this year. This year it's a weekend.
Oh, that's nice.
I know, it is. It's Saturday. February birthdays are the best.
Four until Friday.
Oh, Maddie, you just went, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I need somebody from a different row so that you can stretch more than a desk away. Way to really stretch those boundaries and go out of the comfort zone. Caden, how about B? Or is there more extrema? No, right. It's just pretty clear looking at that. There's 2 valleys, 1 hill. Okay, how would we answer the absolute extreme on this one? So there's 2 answers. So when it asks for absolute, they generally have to give absolute max and absolute min. Really the only weird detail on this is if you have multiple spots tied for the absolute, you would list all of them, but this one doesn't.
So that absolute min is -3, -8.
Nope. How come? I'm assuming you kind of already know. My guess is you answered 2-2 just because you weren't sure what to answer.
Yeah, let's go to infinity.
Yeah, it's clear that there's numbers and the line is higher than 2-2. It's possible that you can't give an answer because there's no specific spot. The other weird and annoying fact, let's say both of these didn't have arrowheads, and let's say both of these had open circles. There would be no absolute max because you can't specifically say where the top is. Now, I haven't seen these questions in this packet, but these were in the textbook. And I have seen them on the AP test. If it's an open interval, even if this point is listed, let's say this is the point 7, 10, sure. The fact that it's an open circle means your function goes right up to it, but not it. And so since you can't specifically say where the max is, then you would just say there isn't one. And I've always found this to be a really strange idea. Like, you know exactly where the top is. It's right below 10. But since you can't answer that, then there isn't one. And that you're not allowed to say 10 minus. Yeah.
What if it was a filled-in circle then? Would
Then that if it's a filled-in closed interval, that definitely can be the max. Because that's a specific spot. Okay, what do we got? See if you guys can answer A and B on your own. I mean, honestly, you've done really well so far. I'm purposely trying to pick, weird questions, weird answers. You guys have done a pretty good job. Did I hear I just skipped it?
No, there's a point that for whatever reason, my eyes just skipped over.
Oh, got it. It's a terrible name. The logo looked atrocious.
Oh, did a logo come out too?
That apparently they had helicopters in Washington that were trying to get a peek at everything ahead of time, and they zoomed in through the windows of the stadium to try to find the name. It looked terrible. The current name is better than the Commanders. Hannah, did you figure out A? I'll just write them on the picture instead. I think that might be quicker.
Okay, there's a relative minimum at 2, -2,
Nice.
and 10, 2,
Good.
and then a relative max at 7, 7.
Good. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's one at 5, 3, but I don't know.
Oh, is this a question mark for others as well? I should erase it now? Oh, you look like you were questioning yourself.
No.
So, this is going to be one of the weird situations where you kind of have to remember the definition of what a relative min is. I know, like, looking at a picture is really easy usually. A relative min would be when it changes from decreasing to increasing. A relative max is when it changes from increasing to decreasing. And if you look at this kind of strange location, which this is made from like a piece function or something, it's increasing to increasing. And so it would just be nothing. Like, that, you're definitely going to have spots that look like it's odd or whatever, but it doesn't have to be labeled anything at all. Okay, good. Very good. Considering the domain for f, Neil, what does that mean, considering the domain for f?
The interval,
I don't know what that means.
like, between 0 and 12.
Okay, so basically the domain for f is just what's shown on the picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, what you said was great. So the domain refers to the x values that the picture is using. And so it's only going from 0 to 12. Okay. So considering the domain for f just means looking at this picture. What are the absolute extrema of the function? Poyraz, do we have any?
I said an absolute minimum at 2, -2, and then an absolute max at 7, 7.
Perfect. The endpoints could be absolute max and min, but they didn't. I kind of almost wish that they would have made this point go up to here, so that it would have been an absolute max to show you that it can be. But whatever. That's why I purposely set it on that other picture. Okay, if I remember correctly, this is all the farther I wanted to go because I believe the next page is the extreme value theorem. And so I will stop here. And we've got about 20 minutes where I know a lot of you need to work on 5.1 still. And I thought this would be a great time that you could work on 5.1 or start the homework on 5.2. So everybody kind of has their own whatever.